Yes, I think Ayhan will be here soon. Then you have the floor, sir. We have some time, so you have enough time. Thank you very much. So this presentation, which will be delivered in this uh, session, is about the political economy of sub-Saharan Africa during the post-colonial period. This actually gives us great hints about the current security problems that African countries are facing, because right now we see a different type of activity. We know that internal security problems are not directly related to the country's problems itself. Now, in the geopolitical sense, we need to base it on a political foundation, because we are not only talking about interests, but we also have to look at geopolitical theories, because the type of value transfer changed. Previously, in the Middle Age, countries would loot, they would go into war. Now, as the level of civilization improved, the interventions changed. So, we have two important topics. First one is the after the Napoleonic Wars, the establishment of the Metternich system in Europe, and the second one is Turkey's perspective towards Africa. So African solutions to African problems, which is Turkey's vision for Africa. As you know, in our presentation, international power, international influence means that country's impact over other countries. So from this perspective, we can say that countries have to use some kind of power, but is this going to be hard power or soft power? It is up for them to decide. And is there a dilemma for that? That's another question. In the past decade, there's another definition for power. So with regards to Turkey's policies, we have to take into consideration Turkey's own dynamics and other dynamics, and Turkey also supported these countries militarily. So we now can talk about smart power, which is a new type, a new category of power. So if you have economic or diplomatic priorities, first you have to try to solve them through diplomatic means or commercial means. And if that fails, then you can resort to military power, or you can support your partner in the military sense. Now, as you know, this is what was suggested by the Metternich system. It talks about establishing a system in Europe to make sure that other countries would not dare to attack Europe. The UK was out of these unities. So, if one of these alliances became more powerful than the other one, then the UK would support the powerful one. So the biggest failure in the Metternich system is that it doesn't care any other region than Europe, because a war in Europe would definitely have destructive outcomes, same as we have seen in the Napoleonic Wars. So armed countries actually are seen as a threat, which then subsequently led to wars and conflict. So this is also another dilemma that Europe was faced with back in the day. So before all else, we have to say one thing. If Europe wants to maintain its welfare, then the welfare of other countries should serve Europe's welfare. So let me elaborate a little bit. So Europe's welfare and prosperity depends on the added value that it can create. So if you want to improve Europe's prosperity, then you have to reduce the added value produced by other countries. You have to prevent them from generating more profit than Europe, and you have to prevent them from accumulating capital. So this is the actually the basis of the world theory. So we have to talk about the central, semi-peripheral and peripheral countries, and you have to prevent countries from shifting from one region to another. And how do you prevent a country from generating added value? Uh, Terrorist activities, conflicts, wars, these have a great impact on countries' prosperity and welfare. So keeping the welfare of Africa low means keeping the welfare of Europe high. So therefore, Europe creates much more added value, and this added value gives you more welfare, more prosperity. So even though you prevent the welfare of a country that you are commercial partners with. So there's a dilemma. We have human rights, we have fundamental rights and freedoms to which every person is entitled to. Then we can ask the question whether there's a difference between human rights in Europe and human rights in Africa. So the geopolitical relation between these countries lead to an unbalance with regards to human rights. So it leads to unequal development. So we need a creative destruction for that. And for that, we need a new political theory. We need a new economic and political vision. So in our culture and in our code, we do not alienate others. So Rousseau developed a term called alienation. This is how it works. If a society, a different or a nation is coded with a different standard than yours, so that nation's, that society's beliefs, language, or ethical background, if you think that they are different, then you don't have to behave the same way. So every bad thing you do is ethical. So this is a very surprising theory, because how can you actually justify a bad behavior towards someone else? Actually, there are great examples we can give for this from Europe. And one important one is that, I'm sorry, I would have to mute myself for a few seconds.
Bu arada çok özür diliyorum. Diğer çalışmanın ortağı benim.
In the meantime, that I can intervene, I am the co-author of this study. I'm sure I'm still on the road because I thought that I would take the floor about 5:40 p.m. So I would like to let Erkan go on and finish and start, and then I will be able to take my seat in front of my computer. I'm sorry for that. That's okay, Professor Ayhan Orhan. Just drive safe. No, that's okay. Don't worry, I'm safe, and I will be before my computer in 5 minutes. And so I had to mute myself because my baby started crying. I didn't want you to be distracted with the noise, so I had to close the door. I was talking about I was talking about some hierarchy and whether it is there in the Europe and Africa in the same way. But what do we mean by hierarchy? In fact, there are certain values, a set of values in the Northern Hemisphere. And also there is another part of the world that are found to be underdeveloped by some people. So there is a differentiation between the two, and there is a hierarchy between the two. It is called the white man effect, or it may be called the African looting. They can also be handled separately. So Turkish policy and the Chinese policy are not really so different. The starting points are in fact very similar. Political negotiation process can be organized with increased commercial dependence. What does that mean? If you have commercial dependence, if you put it in the equation, then you do not talk about supranational dependency, even if the dependency factor is low or high, there is a net profit, net interest for the countries. For example, African countries are a market for Turkey, and Turkey is a market for the African countries. Think about such an ecosystem. So increased welfare in Turkey will be some improved market opportunity, and vice versa. So this is a new perspective. This is the structural, constructive perspective. In fact, with the increased security and welfare in Africa, you see the ecosystem effects. In fact, when there is increased interdependency between the countries, these links get stronger in this ecosystem. For example, a conflict in a country or discontinuation of production, military coups, civil unrest, anything in a country will be a threat for the third-party trading partners. For example, Tigray problem in Ethiopia is a problem for Turkey and China, because this is going to disrupt their increased welfare. And in that case, Turkey will be able to sell less products and goods to that country, and also Ethiopia will be able to buy less goods from Turkey. So if Ethiopia is constant in the equation, then the expansion in supply and demand will be harmed. With this effect, the market will be damaged. Maybe there will be more goods and services generation in Turkey, but you know the trading partner is not going to have sufficient capacity to buy and consume. You can just give the opposite example. In Turkey, the demand for the African goods may increase. However, it depends on whether we have any security thrust to buy. And also, the supply in the other countries should be increasing so that the Turkish people will keep buying, will be able to keep buying. Economic sanctions imposed on Germany by Europe were offered to be the reasons for the crisis in 2001. In fact, the spendable revenue of the individuals declined because of the sanctions, and that reduces the demand, and the companies start to pile up their stocks and inventories. And one of the great depressions of history is triggered by this factor. And in fact, these relations are now win-win relations. So in terms of finding African solutions for the African problems, in fact, any investment to be made here should be organized in order to serve the purposes of African nations and African states. Any trade dependency, any economic dependency may change the interests of Turkey. There should be no conflicts in Africa.
the markets must be operating under normal conditions, and the production manufacturing capacity must be increased in the highest rates. These will add up to the interests of and serve to the purposes of Turkey. There's an important argument here. The neighboring countries I mean, in the colonized or semi-colonized countries in Africa, in fact, when their welfare is not increased, in fact, Europe would be buying cheap raw material and bringing them to their own country in the past, and then they were making higher profit margins. That was the European perspective in the past. In fact, rather than seeing Africa as a market, they were seeing Africa as a mine pit. And I think that was the biggest problem of the United States, because the peace of the United States would never be introduced in Africa, because civil unrest in Africa was a reason for keeping the welfare level low in Africa, and that would enable the Western world to have access to raw material at cheaper prices. Before the 19th century, Europe was signing the fair agreements. It's an ironic name. But, you know, before that, Africa was terra ignoranta. In fact, they were unknown lands. And how would be possible to share all these unknown territories? It would be based on a fair play agreement. For example, one country would inform the other if they would like to expand their territories in Africa. But the African nations would be third parties, and they wouldn't bother themselves by worrying about what they would think about this kind of expansion. So, because those countries were also thinking those nations as source of energy, because human resources is also a source of energy. They would be serving to the European industry. This is a cheap labor. This is some commercial interaction emerging under unequal conditions. So African peoples were not creating a market for the Europeans. They were not households, potential buyer and consumer households, but they were just energy producing units. Maybe this sounds awkward to you. Maybe it's difficult for you to understand from the perspective of today, but it was the conditions of the day. There are multiple examples in this regard, and in fact, one example is as follows. According to Deutschwell, we cannot emancipate the slaves suddenly, because in that case, you know, the slaves will not be an understandable community for the masters. They are hardworking innately, so they will not fulfill the quality and qualifications, and all out liberation should not be possible for them, and the liberation should be possible gradually. And for the slavery, even the idea of Christianization has no meaning, because when they turn Christian, they are not going to contribute to Christianity, but they are going to damage Christianity. And you may say that Deutschwell is a good intellectual, so remember what he wrote about Algeria. Or how should democracy be in France? Think about his essays and other works. In fact, a man like Deutschwell should not be thinking in this way. But you know, that was then in the past. That was in history. In fact, that is a new style of reading history. History is not about chronicles. There's also the geography. and the social dynamics, economic factors also matter when you would like to read history. You have to put them all together, and then you need to read history. Otherwise, you cannot make a sense of what you read. For example, you may say that, oh, what was the business of Europe in Africa, or why didn't the Ottoman go to Europe? These questions are meaningless because you need to look at Europe from the lens of mercantilism, and you need to understand what mercantilism make people do. And also, you need to think about social perspective. You know what is written in Defteri Hakani? Grains were brought from Algeria, and they would be distributed properly in the island kiosks, and the people would be fed first, and then the remaining surplus would be exported. That was the principle. But what was the French doing at that time, at that very time? They were trying to feed the farmers less and less. And the less the farmers would eat, the more France would be exporting, and the more gold coins they would earn. These are two different understandings of classes. In fact, the Ottoman just started to lose its power, and the European gained more and more. This is how you should consider history under the conditions of the day. If now it's more meaningful to discuss about European solutions to, African solutions to be offered for African problems, because they had a certain history, they received some certain treatment, they were always kept passive with supremacist policies. So under equal footing with Europe, in fact, in bilateral trading relations with Europe, by eliminating or discriminating factors, or by eliminating all kinds of alienation, a new commercial model can be created, and this is directly related to the internal security of Africa. Because if internal security of Africa is addressed as a security issue and a problem of interest by other countries, then everyone will agree that these problems in Africa are not only related to Africa, are not only limited to Africa, and basically they are not just about Africa. Because in the Western world, there are people of other ethnic origins, or people of different religious belief. Is it just a problem in Africa? There are other parts of the world, America and Europe, where these people live as well. So why is the reason for increased terrorism? If you prevent the market from operating automatically with its own conditions, and if you just transfer the values through and by hands of the elite only, then the terrorism problem in Africa, religious and ethnic clashes in Africa will not end very easily. This is how I conclude. That should be enough for me right now. So if you have any questions or any contributions, I'll be glad to take them. By the way, Professor Ayhan would like to take the floor after me, I remember. I'm sorry. Once again. Well, as regards the spirit, in fact, we were supposed to talk about certain items, but Erkan, did you talk about Renaissance dam? No, not yet. Okay, let me start talking about the Renaissance dam then. First, let me explain why we chose this topic. So in terms of contents, you talk about sociology aspect, and in fact, you made reference to philosophy too. But here, we had another purpose too. Turkey makes some foreign investments in certain countries, and in those countries, in fact, we wanted to understand the security, the impact on security issues. And we took an example. Turkey created a triangle: Qatar, Somalia, and Sudan. Particularly the Sabakin Island were the corners of this triangle, and it included and contained the Red Sea. Out of this triangle, there was Egypt, and the Egyptian case, which was deepening the East Mediterranean problem. Later on, Erkan, you can also talk about this. In fact, we looked at the Nile, the river Nile. In fact, in the upper basin of Nile, Turkey makes an encatchment, and it's making a huge investment. The Suez Canal and the Red Sea are included in the scope of this investment. In fact, a long canal is going to be constructed. It will be an alternative to the Suez Canal. So countries like Egypt, Sudan, will be holding the water under control. It means they will be holding the power in hand. And in fact, that would be some advanced projection in order to dominate all the security issues. In fact, after China, Turkey is the country with the highest amount of investments in Africa. In fact, the government authorities, in fact, look at the richness in Africa. This is what lays in their horizon. But this is not colonization. This is an understanding of win-win. Turkey is entering the region with this understanding. The military bases are being established, and the balances are being reset with this understanding. We see this as an important phenomenon. In fact, we have been conducting this study with my doctorate student. Of course, there will be important initiatives in this region in future. But with what we have been highlighting is related to the energy resources, food resources, and water resources in the region. If this is the post-colonial era, now it's a time of win-win. Now it's about creating interest for all the countries. It's about fixing our financial situation mutually. And these are the investments that target 2071 vision. In fact, I emphasize this in all my talks. And with the logistic investments of Turkey included, in fact, you can say that Turkey will continue to be a gateway and bridge between Asia and Africa. And it's important that these investments are made in a way to remain on top of the security. By the way, we are talking about the dam. We give the name Renaissance Dam, but Renaissance is the name of the contractor company. This is build operate transfer method. The north south line of North Africa will be given security with this investment as well. So if there are any questions, I think Erkan can get the questions. I can also introduce myself, although it's late. I am Ayhan Orhan. I'm a member of faculty in the Political Sciences Department of Kocaeli University. Erkan is a very successful student of mine. He's having his doctorate study right now. Now, I would like to pass the floor back to you. Yes, Erkan Bey, you can go on if you would like to. In fact, I didn't talk about the Renaissance Dam. You're right. In fact, we call the chapter as hydro diplomacy. This is the second part of our article. There are two aspects here. So how do countries manipulate the bilateral relations? Is it soft power or hard power? In hydro diplomacy, all the geopolitical diplomacy rules apply. In hydrological diplomacy, if one country is going to predominate the other, in fact, the country is going to encircle the other country, and in fact, they're going to find hinterlands, and then economy politics will be used. So first, dependency will be created, and then escalated, and then dissolved. But let's think about Renaissance Dam. It's not only for Ethiopia, Somalia, and Sudan. It's not just important for those countries. So it's important that this dam is being constructed in Upper Nile Basin. It means that one pillar of this hydro diplomacy is in Egypt. And Egypt had a status quo there. And in fact, it was aligned with the high hard power. But now we see there is a new player there, and it is Turkey. Machiavelli says in his book written in 15th century that France encountered some problems and made some strategic mistakes when it was invading Italy. So it made a powerless player more powerless, and they included a powerful player into the game. So he's talking about the war between France and Venice. Now, in fact, France was or had to face Spain in addition to the Italian states after that war. Sudan was already weaker because of the religion-based conflicts. And in fact, the geopolitics are already known for these countries. But, another country now is invited to the game. Think about Tigray issue. As of yesterday, an accord was made, and here we almost have the resolution. In fact, there we see the military and economic support of Turkey to Ethiopia. There is also diplomatic support to Ethiopia. So with the elimination of Tigray problem, Egypt will no more have the right of directly involving in or intervening in the internal matters of Ethiopia. So, in fact, Ethiopia is a different country. And it holds the assets, the resources. Now it can start a new initiative. It can start constructing that dam. It's all about water, and also it's about water for human beings, but water for irrigation purposes. Now that makes Ethiopia stronger. In fact, rules are set by the traditions. The dominating power was always Egypt in the region, according to traditions. Conventionally, it was always Egypt, and that was the case since the ancient pharaohs of Egypt. But now the game is changing. Upper Nile is changing the status quo against the Lower Nile, and there are two dynamic points for this change. One is in the Upper Nile basin, and the second point is in the Eastern Mediterranean. So exclusive economic zone was signed by Turkey, and now Egypt is encircled. And now Egypt has to sit in the table of diplomacy, because to the west there's Libya, to the south there's Sudan and Ethiopia, to the north in the East Mediterranean there's Turkey. It is totally uncaptured. If it is looking for a way out, then it may turn its face to the east, and on Sarakin Island, Turkey has this base. So any direct movement of Egypt does not seem to be possible. That's a miniature of land domination theory. This is a regional miniature. In fact, this is about the will of constructing the Renaissance dam in that region. If Turkey sticks to this and if Turkey would like to see this, if Turkey would like to ensure the necessary guarantees for this, there are no diplomatical barriers to this. It's about the balance of powers. A country who thinks it is powerful wouldn't like to change the status quo, and in fact, that country wouldn't like to answer to the needs of other countries. So the balances in a game may be changed by new players, and this is what we mean by hydro diplomacy. In fact, the smart power impact is seen in how you use the power. International, global, regional, supranational organizations may always be there, but the relations must be sustained in line with international law. For example, supporting Haftar in Libya and supporting the legal government in Libya. These are the two options, and Turkey followed international law. And in order to align our interests with international law, we need to transparently show our will. These are inputs, and in the African policy, Turkey's position will be made clearer with all these inputs. The African population is increasing, and Africa's importance in terms of raw material supply is increasing because of the imperial policies implemented. In fact, security was seen differently from the external perspective. Regional countries have to establish their policies in line with the international law and in line with the interests of local communities as well. And military and economic and political alliances are important. Turkey is looking for protecting its rights originating from international law, and also Turkey has to show that it's there transparently. And Turkey has this big weapon here, and it is the non-existence of any colonial past. So Turkey doesn't come with any luggage to the game. Thank you very much. If there is anything missing, I will be ready to answer. Thank you, Mr. Oflaz. Professor Ayhan, would you like to utter a few more sentences? Well, I don't have many things to add